So you're upset with...
I'm upset with myself. I've failed you. I've failed the viewers.
I'm flattered you think that anyone's listening, but
there's literally dozens of us.
You were upset over missing something about last week's episode on Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say right off the bat that the trailer for Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, is a pretty decent trailer. You don't see trailers like that anymore.
I did cut it down for time. So I
know,
made some of the edits a little snappier.
Yeah. Anyway, but that was just something I thought looking back on it. I'm like, man, it's an interesting. These are interesting trailers. How like even that stuff changes as time goes on.
Especially given that we're like going back to some older stuff and like seeing how like the cutting edge kind of moved the bar, so to speak, over the years. Mm-hmm. It is interesting.
But yeah, you forgot to, what happened here? Something escaped you.
Yeah, I can't believe, because I had it in my mind that week that we did Texas Chainsaw, and it just hit me the other day. I was like, you stupid idiot. You did not bring up Ed Gein, who is a direct inspiration.
Okay.
He's a direct inspiration for both Texas Chainsaw and Psycho, which was kind of like, I was like focusing on like these connecting threads following up the chain of like this whole like patchwork we made for Halloween this year, and I completely botched one of them. Like an idiot.
Well, there goes our chance at stardom. It's over now, man. It's over. We only get one shot.
But I did get to have a s'more about 20 minutes ago, so that was pretty cool.
Ooh, a s'more. Like you actually made it yourself, or?
Yes. I kind of mentioned to you last week that we got the solo stove kicking.
Oh yeah, you got that little thingy outside.
Yeah, it's been cool.
How is that?
Honestly, it's making the fall season right now. It's pretty great.
Yes. Aren't you loving that finally we got some cooler weather outside instead of the...
I'm loving it. It's so great. I've had enough of the heat. I can't take the goddamn heat.
I prefer the colder weather. I think in another life I was a cold man.
I hate the spring too, because like my head does not do well in the spring. So like
spring might be my least favorite.
I get like
season.
The limited window of fall to have like ideal livable circumstances.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I like all the seasons, but if I had to put them in order,
I don't like all the seasons. I like half of them.
You like half of them? What ones don't you like? So spring, what's the other one?
I'm not a big honestly, like I like the coziness of inside of winter. I do not like the messy winter we get in Pittsburgh.
Messy winter, like late winter stuff. Yeah.
But
once we get into like past New Year's into January, February, that's where it gets.
Honestly, all of winter in Pittsburgh is terrible. We get like maybe 2 good days of winter, like, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what we're in store for this year. But
yeah, so this week, our first foray into the Hitchcock world.
Yeah, which is strange we haven't done.
I thought for sure we'd have bumped into something by now, but I always kind of knew like we're definitely going to tackle Psycho at some point. So
yeah,
I figured.
I think we have mentioned maybe a smattering of him here and there throughout. But yes, this is our first go.
I watched, on the disc for Psycho, I watched the documentary of all like the heavily inspired directors talking about him and like how like their personal experiences of like where he launched their, foray into the cinemaverse. And I thought that was all kind of super, especially Scorsese being the Cape Fear connection, I thought was kind of interesting.
Oh yeah.
So
I always forget Cape Fear.
I love Scorsese's Cape Fear like a lot.
Yeah.
They're all great, but yeah. So we're talking Psycho this week. I figured it was.
We are.
It does kind of like sit on that fence between thriller and horror.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of a stretch, this one, admittedly, but like we said last week, I do think this one kind of qualifies into the slasher genre, even though it's not widely accepted as such. It is more of a thriller, but I
would certainly think so. It falls in the slasher genre, or this is like proto slasher genre in any way, kind of, how like we were saying with,
you kind of put it as it being a progenitor last week, and I liked that.
Yeah, because I think everyone is somewhat familiar with, if not the music, the song, the and
you're just tapping on that Insidious door. You know what you were doing right there.
Oh, come on, I got to do it on this one. I mean, it's huge. But that, and of course,
die.
the shower scene, the famous shower scene that
the shot list and the storyboards for that are phenomenal and have been copied to death. I part of that documentary was Scorsese talking about how he literally ripped off that shot list for Raging Bull, and I thought that was crazy awesome.
Just artists ripping off other artists. Always, that's pretty much the name of the game, honestly.
It really is.
We've talked about that. It's very hard to make something original. You kind of have to just...
Inspiration's part of the creative juice, I think. It's
yes.
You got to kind of lean into that skid.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we're talking about Psycho, 1919, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, arguably what many consider to be his masterpiece, if not one of his best movies.
Yeah, I would agree.
But yeah, tell me, so Ed Gein, tell me a little bit about this dude. I honestly don't know much about.
Most of what I honestly personally know about Ed Gein I learned through last podcast on the left, because they love that dude. But he was a quote unquote serial killer. You know,
he was a real guy. This was a real dude.
A real man, real human being.
Okay.
Largely relatable to Norman Bates. Very much inspiration for the novel Psycho, which inspired the movie Psycho, which are kind of two different creative entities. There's a lot of liberties taken from the book.
Well, and that tends to happen a lot when you
Norman Bates
adapt.
Book and movie character are two very different people.
Yeah, I mean that always happens a lot when you adapt book to film or vice versa. There's just they're two different mediums.
Yeah,
and they can excel and do things in certain areas better than the other can.
Yeah, but Ed Gein was a serial killer. Very much had the mother complex of Norman Bates. A lot of very big similarities like taxidermy, obsession, the dual personality, a lot of those things going on. So he was largely given the detached nature of his crimes, he was very much cited as an inspiration for both Texas Chainsaw and Psycho. So that being the core thread that I wish I had touched on last week. Oh well, I'm a human being. I make mistakes.
Well, hey, we're touching on it this time. But what? So he had to be. I'm trying to look up here. Like what era was he from? Ed Gein.
1906. He was born, died 1984.
Yeah, that is Edward Theodore Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul. Interesting.
Yeah.
And Body Snatcher too. Across Wisconsin. Wow, he was born in 1906, died in 1984.
Dude had a long life.
So Plainfield, yeah. So that's interesting. Like I have not heard the story behind this
it is interesting. I do have this book, which was partly my inspiration for including both of these in our list, called Behind the Horror, True Stories That Inspired the Horror Movies by Dr. Lee Mellor. It's a good book. Do recommend. A lot of cool information in it. And it cites a lot of the inspiring points of Gein's story and like the obviously like the media circus surrounding that.
Yeah.
How, because it did become such a big story in the press, it obviously took some grounding in the horror genre of people who would take that ball and run with it. So definitely some cool stuff. There's also like a lot of information on various inspired horror stories off of real events. It's a cool one. But
interesting. Okay, so this gentleman, even though it's like I don't think it's a direct telling of Ed Gein, but certainly this person inspired or brought about some sense of Psycho for Hitchcock.
Yeah, and like I said, it was like very much the mother complex, the dual personality. A lot of like the core elements that make up Norman Bates's psychosis were prevalent in the Ed Gein story. But yeah, definitely that's like a topic for another time. Definitely interesting if people want to dive into it. I recommend the research on that. But 1960, in the years leading up, I believe Hitchcock sent
that fantastic that mythical quality of like, well, I was walking in the woods one day,
which Hitchcock had a penchant for doing that. So
and he was one. I think he's one of the earliest ones I can know of that he always appears at some point in his movies. Correct? I'm trying to think if there was anyone before him, but
he didn't always do it, but he had a lot of cameos in his projects. M. Night Shyamalan emulated this. Who else?
Yeah, he had a lot of
There's another big one. But
I mean, Stan Lee and all the Marvel movies always making a cameo.
Yeah, and then Hitchcock Presents. He had his own television show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the notoriety of Psycho. Like, there's a lot of elements to why Psycho has endured and had such a vast impact Number one being on its release, people were forbidden from coming into the theater late, leaving early. If you came into the theater, you had to stay the duration. If you left, you would not be admitted back in.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, what was the intention behind that, or what?
The thought process was to have people enjoy the movie the way it was intended to be seen, from start to finish, without like losing or getting distracted. Hitchcock especially wanted people to fully experience the movie the way it was meant to be seen, so that way people wouldn't have any negative judgments from missing certain elements or being lost. He wanted people to focus on it.
So we're talking here that this was certainly then not, because they used to do like the old picture shows prior to this, where the film just kept playing.
Yeah.
And you came in when you came in, and you left when you got back to the part that you had come into. There wasn't that start and beginning moment, that set scheduled time to watch it. That's interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, there's a lot of newsreel and stuff that's very interesting on that. Especially, like, I think they actually have the newsreel on the disc. Check out. So there's a lot of great material on that Blu-ray. I do recommend it. But so Hitchcock was obviously very much into this. The big thing, other than the way he picked up the story, the process of releasing it, he stated that before he ever got into Psycho, we wanted his next project to be the quote-unquote highest quality, low-budget movie ever made.
It's I love that. Like, I want to make the highest quality, lowest budget movie ever made.
And it was like, honestly, you look at his thought process through that. There's a lot of, cited material from his assistant, who outlived him for a number of years, was like the biggest point of reference for getting inside his head. Mm-hmm. She had a lot of great insights, and talking about that, it was like he was watching a lot of these low budget movies that were coming out in the late 50s. He wanted to step into that arena. He wanted to be part of that, but he wanted to bring his perceived highbrow quality to, the lower rung, and knock something totally out of the park, which you can very much argue he did with Psycho.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Psycho, we're talking like 1960. I mean, I mentioned, the famous shower scene. This was definitely something that you didn't see. I mean, it's certainly coming out of the 50s.
Yeah.
These weren't things that you necessarily showed.
Well, also the state of the FCC at that time, what the most controversial shot in that sequence is? It's not her being stabbed to death. It's the flushing of the toilet.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it was technically against the FCC to show a flushing toilet at that time. And it was the biggest break in the FCC regulations at the time. What
is so... I'm trying to think, what the heck is the mindset behind don't show a flushing toilet?
It was just like that was that time. It was like that was something that was too taboo. You do not show that. That's disgusting. It was like that was the mantra. And it was... I still love to this day, like that is the most controversial part of this movie, not a woman being violently stabbed to death. Yeah. It's a toilet.
Yeah, it's just the toilet flushing.
Yeah.
What in God? I don't know. I think that mindset still kind of pervades in some ways in today, because it's like, oh, well, we can show like horrible violence. We still see and grotesquerie in today's stuff. But damn it, if you say a swear word, then I'm out of here.
Yeah, it's like the weird double standard for certain things.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it is interesting how violence and death seems to somehow like get a pass when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
even if it's not graphic, just the thought of people just dying in the narrative, can be is interesting. How that it's like, well, yeah, that's okay, but this flushing toilet, you're gonna have words with you about this one.
I think in modern time, and thinking more so in modern times, it's more about like, oh, the horror movie is going to make a lot of money because it's low budget. So the suits see dollar signs, but then they realize, oh, this weird arbitrary thing might cause us problems. So no, you can't do that. Like,
you can't do that. Yeah.
I think that's where the weirdness comes from in some cases.
Interesting.
But I almost wonder, like, did he do it on purpose as like a middle finger?
I would imagine there had to be some sort of the notion of, kind of a middle finger maybe.
Yeah.
Hitchcock sounds like someone who would be like, no, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And screw you if you think I'm going to change it because of some dumb.
He was well established. He knew that would be an issue. It was like, it was definitely on purpose.
Uh-huh. There has to be some intent there.
He also had a very sick sense of humor, so I think that was part of it. But yeah, like the impact of this movie, of like the nature of taking the protagonist out of the story halfway through, totally unheard of by 1960.
Yeah.
Definitely shook
definitely. This is
the sensibility of people and expectations.
Yeah, no, this is definitely something from the writing standpoint, from the narrative. It's just like, whoa, wait. And that's there's like that. There's a big risk there in doing that. Now, does the book do that? Or I've never read the book.
Yes, I believe so, because I think it's based off of the Ed Gein story. I know that the money aspect of it was, if not as prevalent, not even there in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's given less time and backstory in the sensibility of the book. I don't believe the money was even part of her story in the book.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like we were saying, that difference of book to screen, some very interesting differences that I think show a lot of Hitchcock's like stylings, a lot of his choices in an interesting light.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, and that's a big, like I said, that's a big narrative risk, getting rid of a character that late in the story the way you do.
Well, I think it's interesting how like her role, even after death, still does play a part in the narrative, because like largely the driving force behind the progressing of the story is, will Norman get caught for what he did?
Yeah.
And so it's like Marion does still play a role despite not being in the story. And it's the drive behind the other characters who have attachment to her to take this as far as they do to try and find her. So it in a way, it's like she is still part of the story, even though she isn't. And I've always found that really interesting.
Well, the natural like catalyst to the events that are going to play out as the movie picks up.
Yeah.
Behind, who has essentially the search for Norman's mother for the characters and for the audience too, if you've never have never seen it.
Well, also the way that they shoot all the interactions with the mother, all the those little moments, and the way it's portrayed, it's kept very secretive. It's almost like that "Don't show the shark in Jaws," you know?
Yeah.
And it makes that impact once we realize the big reveal. Spoilers if you've never seen a movie that's 60 years old. That Norman is actually psychologically portraying his mother. She died years ago, and he's holding on to this visage that she is still alive.
Yeah.
And all the actions that we witness being portrayed by the mother were actually Norman. So to give a little bit of backstory on the plot, Marion steals $40,000 from her workplace, plans to escape with her boyfriend. She drives out into the boonies, ends up at the Bates Motel, and to put it quite simply, Norman kills her over internal conflict of his mother personality and his own personality, of him being attracted to Marion. And then Marion's sister and boyfriend go looking for her, and that's how he is eventually caught.
Yeah. But of course, they don't know at the time that it's Norman who's done it.
They're just following the breadcrumbs of where she might have gone, and just happen to get quite lucky in catching it.
I don't know why, but you want to know my first introduction to Psycho?
Sure.
It was Rocko's Modern Life.
Oh, hell yeah. I forgot about that. I think they actually referenced the toilet thing in that episode, if I remember correctly.
They do. I think, yeah. Oh, no, I think something with... Oh, yes, we have... Like, they're looking... Him and Heifer, I think, or maybe it's Filbert, they're looking for rooms to stay in the night.
Yes. That's the band outside, episode.
And he's just like, oh, yes, we have rooms. We have vacancy. We have showers in all the rooms. And you just see a light go on in the back. He's like, what's that? Come in, mother. And he, like, puts on, like, the outfit, and he just runs away. And, And then I think, like, Rocko or Heifer, one of them says, let's try a different one.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That show was a gem.
So that was my introduction to Psycho. Like, little did I not know what was going on at the time. It was going over my head, but I'm like, oh, it's like one of those things where you recognize it from something else that you saw.
Similarly, my introduction to Star Wars was through Muppet Babies. So
Muppet Babies. I haven't seen that in a while.
Yeah, classic piece of television.
But
as we drift from the topic at hand.
Yes, let's not go too far off. But yeah, so Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, which I think here is interesting that you have. So in the novel, Norman Bates, again, I've never read the novel, but is described as an overweight, balding, middle-aged man with glasses.
Yeah.
Socially awkward, unlikable, and his inner thoughts are sort of the forefront of the book, which absolutely makes more sense for a novel, because that's one of the things a book can do better than almost any art form, is the ability to get inside a character's head.
Yeah, and that change is interesting for the sake of the story because it does make Norman a more empathetic character. You buy into the fact more that he's innocent in this whole grand scheme.
Yeah, Anthony Perkins, especially at this time, very different from the Norman Bates described in the novel. And like you said, more sympathetic and approachable, allowing for that shock when we discover what's been going on.
And there's a lot of little clever details to that end, too. It's like whenever Norman first becomes aware that Mother has killed Marion, he yells, "Oh, Mother, blood!" And then the next we see him running down to the hotel room, and we perceive that there's been no lapse in time, but then you kind of get the assumption that he cleaned up between then because there is no blood on his hands, but that sells to the audience that there's no way he could have been involved because he would have been covered in blood if he had just stabbed her to death. So it's the playing with perceptions in that thriller sense that Hitchcock is so good at sells this crazy mind-bending story so well.
Yeah, no, every Hitchcock, like this, The Birds.
Yeah, Rear Window,
makes you, there's always that question of what you're seeing. Is that really what happened? The questioning of your own memory, your own senses. That definitely is a big underlying motif.
I would say the best of those that he does, to get us slightly off topic, would be Rope. I do think that is his most underrated. Yeah, way ahead of its time, but topic for another time.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Hitchcock, definitely, without a doubt, Hitchcock, one of the masters of cinema. I mean, you can't talk about, the history of American cinema without having Hitchcock in the conversation.
He is kind of the king of the thriller. He definitely had his dabblings in horror that were extremely successful, but he was the king of the thriller.
Yes, not to be confused with Thriller, written by Michael Jackson.
No, one and the same. That's what I meant.
One and the same.
But yeah, since we were mentioning Anthony Perkins, a piece of information that I just recently became aware of that was kind of tragic that I thought was very interesting. So Anthony Perkins got married after this movie, and it turned out that his wife was part of the terror attacks of September 11th, and she was killed. I didn't know that until like the other day.
Whoa!
I was like, that's kind of wild.
Okay. Yeah, the little like tidbits that. So, did Anthony Perkins do anything? I mean, I know he did things after this, but this was what he was most well known for.
Yeah, this was the kind of the linchpin of his career. He had done some other things. I know he did several of the sequels to Psycho.
Doesn't he make an appearance in when they tried to redo it? They did it in the night. They did like a remake in the 90s.
I forget in what capacity, but I know he was in the shot-for-shot remake with Vince Vaughn.
Yeah. Okay.
I honestly don't remember what capacity, but which that whole thing was very odd too. Now, since we're in this, let's bring that up because
that just kind of came to my mind when we were.
That's a great topic. Also, I mean, there's been a lot of attempted remakes over the years, but that's one of the cardinal few that tried to shot for shot remake its original, and it kind of leaves you in a weird space because like that really leaves it only to the place that you can interpret it as directly comparing the performances of one of the greatest movies of cinema. It puts it in an odd place.
Well, that is strange. Like, okay, I get the urge of wanting to remake. Everybody wants to remake something at some point, but to not bring anything new to the table is strange to me.
Yeah. I think like the big thing was that it was in color and the original had never been in color.
True. But is that all? Like, we're just going to, I don't know. It's like.
It was an odd time when that one was made.
I would love to know what brought about let's redo Psycho.
I do remember it being a bit like when that came out, it was like a big selling point that it was in color, that you didn't hear a lot about the performances because I think it did draw unfavorable comparisons, which was unfortunate because the cast was great. Yeah. But yeah, that was a strange, interesting experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely definitely a case study.
Yeah.
If you compare the two.
It's kind of in a similar pantheon to me as Twilight Zone, even though like Twilight Zone wasn't like a direct cardinal copy of the TV show. It was like a lot of the stories of the TV show just repackaged into more polished product, but it was like stuff people had already seen, not to mention cut with the whole controversy of the tragedy on the set. But even still, it was like there was still a lot of complications there. and interesting stuff. I mean, yeah, like Bernard Herrmann's score, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Bernard Herrmann was establishing himself as a force at this point. I mean, he had been around since I don't know if it was his first, but definitely one of his first big blips was The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Oh, great! Yes, there's another one, the original.
Establishing himself really well at being competent with a theremin, which is an extremely difficult instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Insane talent and very uniquely stylized. Bernard Herrmann. He's kind of like John Williams. Once you hear his style, it's kind of hard to get it out of your head.
Yeah, it is.
He kind of was the John Williams of his time. Now that I think about it, that's interesting.
Let's go into, we talked about, kind of did the overview. We have Anthony Perkins playing Norman Bates. He is the owner of the Bates Motel.
Yes.
And this, of course, pushes him to, cinematic stardom with this role. But then Janet Leigh playing Marion Crane. Talk a little bit about, because I like how you have here, is the film's initial protagonist.
Yeah. And also, like, I've seen a couple of interviews with her later in life, and her, very retrospective take on, like, looking back at the whole process of working with Hitchcock. And super cool. Like, the way she looked at it, everyone always asked if she would have had a problem with being taken out of the movie halfway through and not getting a full cinematic experience as an actress. She seemed to have never had that take on it. She was just ecstatic to be working with such a legend, and she took it as something that had never really been done that way before, so it obviously would stand out and give her a cutting edge as an actress. So I to her credit, I thought that was super cool that she never really had an issue like that, or at least expressly never had an issue like that. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and she ends up winning a Golden Globe,
Yeah.
Best Supporting Actress for Psycho, and an Academy Award nomination.
Which if she, if she had gotten stir crazy and had fear over the role and maybe fought back on that being a decision, maybe never would have got to that point. So the commitment and sticking with it and having faith in it is to her credit, Yeah, no,
and two other great films that she's also in, if anyone's never seen, Touch of Evil.
Yeah, which is fantastic.
And Little Women from 1949. So yeah, I mean, definitely these we're going back here now with actors, but these are definitely people to study.
Yeah,
especially if you're interested.
There's some good information in these time capsules that if you're willing to go back and do a little bit of research, you can find some cool information.
Oh, and like I think I said it previously in last week's episode, these are sometimes why it can be hard to watch the older movies is because they will do stuff that you have probably seen before, the tropes and what's going to happen in the story, but you would have seen it from a later incarnation, from a more modern, you would have seen, the stuff that like happens after it or what got inspired from it. Like this, like we said, is the progenitor of that. And that can be sometimes why it's difficult to watch something that's older, because you're not in the mindset of when this would have, you have to almost put yourself in that time period of when it came out and what was going on.
That's part of, honestly, my joyous part of watching movies is to kind of trace the genesis of ideas back in time. There's a lot of cool thought processes to study there from creators who, like the push-pull from Jaws, taken from Vertigo, taken from German Expressionism. These things just continue back in time. And like visual storytelling obviously is new within the last 100 years, but there's been a lot of kicking things back and forth since then. Yeah. So it's interesting to follow. And like a lot of people compare Hitch to a lot of other directors. Like I said, they had that director's retrospective of them all talking about him. And I mean, a lot of directors are very comparable, like Spielberg especially. There's a lot of Scorsese, obviously, with taking on Cape Fear. There's a lot of directors who have comparable qualities to him. Some would say Christopher Nolan has a lot of similarities. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting that John Carpenter was on that doc as well, talking a lot.
Oh, he was? Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, these two proclaimed titans of the horror and thriller genres, like their styles are so very different, but it is interesting that John Carpenter was so inspired by Hitchcock. Because while I mean he deals with suspense in a lot of the same ways, but they're very different tacks with a lot of things. Yeah. But I mean, I guess they're both similarly crass too, so so it's interesting.
Moving on, we got Vera Mills. Am I saying that right?
I believe so, to my knowledge, yeah.
Or Miles. I don't know if
Miles, what are you doing here, man?
Sister. Miles, doing here, man? Marion's sister, who gets the suspicion, like, once her sister goes missing.
Which great casting, because I totally believe that they're sisters.
Yeah, no, same. And that's the good job to the casting director,
which should be recognized by the Academy, but still isn't.
Oh, there is no like recognition for casting directing?
They're talking about implementing it within the next like 4 years, but it's like, in my opinion, 100 years too late. Yeah, well, yeah. Nothing new when it comes to that. Yeah.
But essentially she becomes the protagonist then, in my opinion, once, yes, Marion is dispatched.
I would agree. Yeah.
From the story.
Because, like I said, that nature of wanting to vindicate or find the truth regarding what happened to her, it's kind of personified in her sister at that point. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think about, I'm talking about inspiration again when we mentioned Last of Us before we did the episode on that. That's why I think killing Marion off the way he did it, like that you're taking a risk. Certainly how, you look at things like how people weren't big spoilers for Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, dude.
So if you don't
people
must not
have that one spoiled.
Yeah, but you've been warned. Did not realize that. Oh my God, what's the main character's name?
You're bringing shame to your family.
I know. I'm sorry. What's his name? It's gone. It left. What? Joel. Thank you. I was about to say Sam. I'm like, it's not Sam. When Joel is killed by Abby.
Yeah.
Right off the bat. And with that, you have a whole first game to play as him, and now it's like, all right, now we're gonna take off and play as Ellie.
It kind of has that yin yang pivot point where it's like the torch is carried down to Ellie.
But yeah, when I look at the narrative structure of that being a video game, the psycho turn, if you want to call it that, is certainly looks like inspiration to it. Or you can't look at it and like once again draw that thread of like, oh, well, here's something that did it before.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting because you can very much look at Last of Us as like two parts of a whole story, and that kind of is the midpoint. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, within Psycho, you have that similar that character moment where Lila has to go and figure out why Marion has gone missing, and this allows her to team up with with Marion's boyfriend.
Yeah,
that's where Sam was coming from. Sorry.
Yeah,
I was like, why do I have the name Sam in my head right now? I was like, oh yeah, because that brings on to one of our next main characters, Sam Loomis, played by John Gavin, who I totally forgot that he was in Spartacus.
Yes. Fantastic connection.
Which came out in the same year, which I also totally forgot until right now.
Yeah. Also, like there was that age of dialogue right around this time.
Yeah.
That we'll get into also in one of our, actually, I think the finisher episode for horror this year. I have another one of these to bring up, but I don't even want to say the word hokey because it doesn't even do it full justice, but like just the like cheesy level dialogue of like the dominating male characters of movies such as this is like so good. I want to make so badly parody of stuff like that. But yeah, there's some serious gold there.
Yes, but speaking of gold, but what a golden opportunity for John Gavin in 1960 to come out both in Psycho and Spartacus. So he worked with Hitchcock and
Kubrick.
Thank you. Oh my God,
bringing shame.
Well, hey. That wasn't nearly as long. It was on the tip of my tongue. I had it. You just took it from me.
I knew where it was going.
but yeah, plays an important role
also,
in Psycho.
The character's name, for anybody who follows the John Carpenter verse, was pulled from as inspiration in Halloween. Dr. Samuel Loomis.
Oh, okay. All right.
Which has also spurred many further down the chain inspirations that can be traced back and back and back. It's interesting.
And back, definitely
back and to the left.
Speaking of interesting, back and to the left. Speaking of interesting, I didn't realize that Gavin, when he got away from acting and decided to do a career in politics and served under Reagan as an ambassador to Mexico.
Yeah, super interesting.
How about that little tidbit?
Seemed to be a trend with actors of that time getting into politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. All right. Let's talk a little bit about now the nuts and bolts of the production behind this.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yeah. So $800,000 was the budget
For 1960, like, I'm trying to find like a good comparison. It's a pretty modest budget. It's not super crazy.
Yeah.
Like, especially for the time, things were done very astronomical budgets comparatively.
Well, yeah, and I guess this must have been on the low side or something. Well, maybe modest, like you said. That's probably the good way to put it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't realize that Hitchcock took a pay cut in exchange for 60% of the film's profits.
Yeah, and he
didn't finance the film himself.
He did that a number of times, and like in favor of keeping control, in favor of like really holding strong to his brand. And the long run, it proved to be one of his greatest successful choices.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, and then using the crew and black and white, even though it's known for the black and white, but that was more out of necessity.
Yeah.
Out of a budget decision, using the crew from his TV show, Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Yeah.
All into, because obviously, yes, you're gonna have difficulty getting funding at this time for something that's given the subject matter, and you have a flushing toilet, so.
As an added bonus.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I had forgotten that it was the crew pulled from Hitchcock Presents. That's a good detail.
Well, that shows how, oh my God, excuse me. That shows the efficiency of it too, because like the production, so they started in November of 59, and to finish all that within 2 months, that's pretty quick.
Yeah.
By feature film standards.
Also, too, I mean, it's worth noting that just within the last several years, the very successful TV show Bates Motel did very well, and that's another iteration of the chain of remakes, redos, sequels, what have yous. But I got really into that series when it was on TV. It took the whole concept and borderline turned it into a horror comedy.
Yeah.
It was kind of wild what they did with it. Vera Farmiga has proven herself like a horror legend at this point between that and Conjuring alone. But I what was the thing? Didn't her younger sister play her in something?
I'm not sure.
I want to say Nun or something. I can't remember.
Oh, in the
Conjuring verse, I want to say her, because her younger sister is also kind of like a scream queen. But yeah, I don't remember the full details of that. But it's worth noting that her sister is like, it's kind of runs in the family, I think was what I was getting at.
Yeah.
But yeah, some super cool stuff. And she's phenomenal as Norma Bates in the TV series. She's one of the funniest horror characters ever, and how the dynamic between her and Norman goes in that show. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't recommend that one enough. The ways that it flips some things on its head from what you know about the story is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they bring in the actor who played Richard Alpert in Lost, because everybody always said that he looked like Norman Bates, like Anthony Perkins, but he doesn't play Norman. He plays another character in the show, and it's kind of like a clever nod to the fact that he looks like him. Yeah. But I always thought that was hilarious, that he's in the show, but he doesn't play Norman Bates. Just fantastic.
Well, and we can't, to keep us going here, we can't, because I don't think we've touched on it too much, but we can't talk about Psycho without talking about the editing.
Oh my God. It's perfectly cut.
I mean, this is one that they show you in film school when it comes to editing, because we talked about the shower scene. 78 different camera setups for less than a minute of screen time.
Notoriously, it was a brutal shoot to get that, because they covered it from so many different angles.
And
this and Birds were notorious for that.
Yeah, and to think how much today, like you can do it a lot easier depending on what you're shooting on, but this would have been I hate to use the term clunkier, but a clunky process compared to how you can shoot now digitally. Yeah, if you want to go that route.
Well, it's also worth noting, I think I forgot to mention when we were talking about Janet Leigh, her daughter is also a very famous actress.
Oh yeah? Who's her daughter?
Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You are right about that.
Completely forgot to bring that one up. I even had it written down. I completely forgot. But yeah, that was her
huge thread.
Big connection. And obviously John Carpenter, being a Hitchcock fan, sought her out.
Yeah.
Was aware.
Well, damn it. Now we don't have a lead in for next week's episode. You needed to forget that one so we could say we could keep the pattern going of our inability to produce these episodes.
No, we have all the ability.
No, dude, I'm just looking at that. That is like for those setups, and then going back, like they shot in November of 59 and it was released on June 16th, 1960. That's unheard of even for today.
Yeah.
To shoot them, like if you're shooting something, even if you scheduled something to start doing principal photography now, you probably wouldn't release it until at least a year later at the very earliest, especially something in the realm of Psycho, because you would want to hit, the scary time market.
Well, also like at the, technical capability of the time, that's a little bit breakneck pace.
Yeah. That is to be able to do that in the amount of time that they did and get it cut, get the sound design, get the score,
and to be as cutting, like totally on the forefront of like these techniques, and to turn it around so fast, like is incredibly impressive.
Yeah,
like think what you will. I know there are people who don't like Hitchcock. Think what you will about the man. He knew his craft very well.
No, absolutely. I mean. And despite, like, it looks like here, even though there's always that mixed reception when something first comes out, it grossed over $32 million that year from the near 800,000. So what is that here? Let's see. That is no, I forget. Hang on.
You're good.
Brian, do math. I don't know math. I'm just the yes man.
Well, I did also think it was very interesting. I was watching the process of reprinting the sound for 5.1, and that was all very fascinating from, like, how do you approach remastering a print of, someone who is so legendary in the circles of filmmaking without, being accused of taking a literary license, altering the perception of the film. The tact that they took was like largely just improve, like adding additional track elements, like, so not like taking any like creative license with anything. It was simple stuff like, they recorded only in mono for these particular tracks. As we're pulling it out to a 5.1 space, this truck is moving from left to right. Let's add in the left to right elements of that same sound to give it an additional dimension.
Yeah.
And that's not like in any way a creative choice. It's literally just adding depth to the existing sound print, which I thought was cool. It's like those kind of choices are always complicated for going into something that people know so well and hold in such reverence. There was like a very like straight and narrow approach to remastering it, and I thought that was very respectful and interesting.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with that.
Yeah, that documentary, honestly, all the documentaries on the disc are fantastic, but that one in particular I found super interesting.
Well, I crunched the numbers. I have the answer I was looking for.
Yeah,
it had close to a 4,000% increase. Profit return from what the budget was to what they made.
Make more horror movies is the moral of that story. More. Well,
we talked about that. You can. I wonder why those are movies that, because you could make. I feel like you could do almost any movie for the cheap, but I guess with horror movies, it just kind of.
It's easy with horror and a lot of types of horror to do single location, to do closed sets, like on a stage, like look at, for example, all the car stuff for Psycho. Very easy to produce, all on a stage. Set up the camera exactly the way, because Hitchcock was known for perfection. He could set it up easily to perfection on a closed stage, quick in and out, get everything he needs, be done, move on to the next.
No, that is true. You think about coming into the 60s here, before, like, you have like the French New Wave films where stuff is starting to, like we talked with A Chainsaw last week, the idea of letting the camera start to move and shoot it that more documentary style, that more realistic touch. But here's Hitchcock coming from an older school of thought, keeping with that full control, like in a studio. So it's interesting, like how. But I think I love both. Like, I'm not particular to any one style or the other.
I find all this stuff interesting. I find all of these different types of stories fascinating because it's like particular sets of challenges and how do you navigate them.
Yeah.
But a lot to all that, especially in the difference of looking at a film in the birth of the 70s where things were getting crazy deep with film stocks and color versus old studio system, yet they're both still so centered around like the same cultural moment in time with Ed Gein. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
I honestly, this is like we've said for pretty much everything through horror. This is one I honestly can't say enough about. It's stood the test of 60-ish years at this point, 60 plus years at this point, 64 years to be exact. Yeah. The bait and switch, Bates and switch is very
You get on me for my antics.
Oh,
my
antics are bad, but no, deserving of shame.
No.
But yeah, I do think that the nature of this one is particular to Hitchcock's career and why it's so legendary. The rollout and the process of how they dealt with the audience only added to its esteem and mythos, and a lot of cool stuff with this one. Definitely one to be researched. I cannot cover this one enough in an hour.
Yeah, but, it's hard to cover this one in an hour to get because there's a lot.
There's some meat on that one for sure in terms of like
this is one history. Definitely worth. Even just to, again, it's in black and white. So I stress that because I know some people just don't want to watch something that's in black and white,
which I will never understand.
Yeah, but I mean, even just to watch to see like what the things they're doing that are different for the time, and to learn, the different creative ways you can tell a story. The music, the song, and
you're just tapping on that Insidious door. You know what you were doing right there.